I thought that maybe something like that had happened.
Mhm.
And
No, that, as I say, I can see how even biographically and in context you could get that. And even
mhm,
thinking about my poems, because I do have a lot of poems in which a birth figures, but I think that's why it became powerful in this case, because for me it was a kind of giving birth, because I had not been I had not been present to this experience. And so it was a birth of a kind of new self
mhm,
for me in the loss, So it was an unusual metaphor to take, I think, and it really did strike me because of the particular circumstances where I was with my father his last 4 days and nights, and I was there the whole time. And I really, it was kind of like an extended labor
yeah,
where you were watching and waiting, um, and it was hard,
oh yeah,
So that came to me that way. The anthology that was published in was an anthology on work.
okay,
So it was hard work. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting yeah. But I sent it in for that because I thought it was work. They were it was a call for things around work. So I said, well, I have this, and there it went.
and I think too that I'm trying to think of how to articulate it. I don't know how to say it. I think either way that you take this poem, in one of the texts that Julie teaches a lot is Ted Kuzer's
Mm.
what is it called? Poetry Home Repair Manual.
Yes,
He
I have
says,
that book.
yes, I have it with me too.
Oh, cool.
He says, if you need if you see a yellow silo and it needs to be black, that's part of the creative freedom of poetry. And even though it's not intentional, I think that it also works in that way too. So I think the ambiguity that maybe was there because of my overlooking it,
Mhm.
I think that it still worked. And I think that that shows like a really strong poem if it can stand on
Mhm.
itself, stand by itself
Mhm.
without that much context.
That's a nice compliment because, yes, I think you are absolutely right. It needs to work to help us think about death, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not there as part of a overt memoir of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using my life experience, but the reason, I mean, what I'm hoping will happen in the writing is that I will gain greater understanding, and also I will have created something that can speak to a reader even if the reader hasn't had my exact life experience. I mean, that's
Exactly.
why we write, right?
Yeah.
I mean, your experience sounds, you know, it, it is very powerful. I have never had the exact experience that you are now writing about, but if your poems are successful, you will help me to think about ways in which I have felt dislocated, or homeless, or do you follow what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So you're drawing on the specifics in order to make the art the same way the painter draws on colors and shapes and etc. But that doesn't mean that the reader needs to have had that exact experience in order to just say, oh yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So you are absolutely right. And it's certainly a legitimate really what you have there is a death that's seen in terms of a birth, and that's both with the difficulty of that and the kind of achievement of it, because there is a kind of achievement which I never would have understood ahead of
Mm-hmm.
time. That there I would have seen it only as a kind of loss or failure, but
Mm-hmm.
the birth metaphor helped me to see it as an achievement, an accomplishment. You um, because and it is part of the life journey, and it is. You And as I think when I read that at KSPS, well, maybe it wasn't that particular one, but I think writing it as a poem and having it, knowing that it would be a container, not just a gush of words,
Hmm.
helped me to be enough in control of it that I could write about it. Otherwise it would have felt unbearably private and
Yeah.
uh, it's like, why should anybody know this? But I do think the movement to create a piece of art, whether it's a poem or, an essay or a photograph, that movement does help us to both experience what we are writing about, but also to get a little distance from it and to shape it, and to help it communicate. So that's a healthy thing. To
Hmm.
become an artist based on your own life helps you to live your life
Hmm.
because it leads to insights, and it also kind of gives you a means of processing and making something serve a purpose for yourself and for others, and that kind of lifts it out of just what you yourself are. You don't wallow in your experience
Yes.
so much as try to get inside that experience so that you can use it to make the art.
And I think too, that takes me back to the I, serious.
Serious,
Serious.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get confident with that. The serious, because you're finding these feelings and giving people something concrete to like, oh, okay, I see the first read through. I see the feeling of this poem. Let's go back and look at what images she's using because there's going to be a purpose for that, right? So going back and finding these pieces that only further the meaning, and then things like that are what inspire at least me personally. And I'm going to extend this, I'm guessing, to you
Mm-hmm.
because you have so much of this natural
Mm-hmm.
imagery in your work. um, Taking more, like, having more of a sense of responsibility for noticing what's going on around
Mm-hmm.
you and appreciating it as a universal way, like everybody's going through this kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, and it kind of takes some of that pressure off of
Mm-hmm.
yourself, even if the plants are going through this rebirth, every year or something like that. It makes it a much more universal thing, I think, both to make yourself feel calmer and for other people to be able to get that same calmness from your work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that made sense, but
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think the act of writing, the act of making art is both that embracing of one's own, seeking to understand it better
mm-hmm,
and to live with it, and also widening the circle that
mm-hmm,
it could embrace. And again, I think that, it's the pitfall, like possibly in the serious. I mean, you sort of. I don't think a reader should have to look up something, So that does. I wonder if I should have written a more narrative poem, about it. But, and when I started, it was more, it really was, here is this flower, and I was trying to articulate what that moment was teaching me. And
mm-hmm,
then that line came, which I think is biblical, isn't it? Banquet laid and no guest came.
mm-hmm,
Isn't there something in the Bible where a feast is laid, and then the guests don't show up? But
mm-hmm,
what's key is the laying of the feast,
mm-hmm.
And so then I didn't want to try to over explain it.
Yeah,
And like, I don't even really I don't give all the backstory about
yeah,
how we got the plant and how ugly it is and all of that, because so, but I don't know. It interests me. I'm glad that I'm certainly happy that it made you want to look it up and that it was meaningful to you then, when you did. But, and interestingly, I'm pretty sure that is one of the two poems that I added in later.
mm-hmm,
I told you I added to, because when I first looked at that, it doesn't seem to be about abundance.
mm-hmm,
And yet it is. The flower was abundant, and it was my response to abundant that made me feel so small because I had missed it,
mm-hmm.
So that's why I think it kind of works in that resonates with the others in the collection.
I think that's my second favorite in the
Yeah.
collection.
Is it really?
My
Well, what
first
was your
favorite
first?
is find I have it marked. Discards.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you liked that. I love that poem. Yeah,
I think just the image of a red couch in
yeah.
in the median on I seventy
Uh-huh.
five. I think it's a cool juxtaposition of the natural and the man made, both with the immediacy of the couch on the grass, and then also all the cars going by on the interstate. And I think it it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit surreal, even though there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing necessarily uncomfortable about the image itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really really liked um, how it brought those together, and then the last stanza, people light on new ideas at dumpsters, shoot them home on their living room sofas, let them burst into bloom, red and gold, count them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that encapsulates
Abundance.
all of it.
Yes.
Yep,
Yes,
exactly.
right. As I say, the idea was there, but well, no, that's. Can I tell you the backstory of
Yeah.
that poem? No, you don't need to show it to me. I remember it, but yeah. So that poem started with that image. I mean, I really was driving from Michigan back to Kentucky just for a trip that spring, and it was May. You know, there was the graduation so on going on at the university, and there really was a red sofa in the median of the interstate. You know, like had it fallen off a truck, or did somebody literally carry it across the interstate to put it there? You know, it was so odd. So that just stuck in my mind. And then as I began writing the poem, another form of a poem is the pantoum.
Hmm.
You know, well, this poem is actually a pantoum poem because what I did, the first part is sort of autobiographical. This was happening around the University of Michigan because people were leaving for the summer and the undergraduates were throwing all this usable stuff away and people were coming and taking it, which is like, it's fine. It
Yeah.
was getting exchanged. So that was in my head, those two things together. And then once I had four lines, so the pantoum form, lines 2 and 4 of the first stanza are lines 1 and 3 of the next. But I said, what if instead of taking the whole line, I just look at it and take a phrase or
Hmm.
a couple words? Because that gave me more freedom. So that's what I did. And then again, stuff started popping. Everything in there came from something that I had either seen or heard. There's a film on creativity in which there's this image of these fishermen on the river in Scotland that I talk about in there. And it's about the guy is a photographer. It's on creativity, but he uses photography as the medium here. And he shows, so the normal look at it, you would have you would have seen them in the mist over there, but instead he got around and shot it through the mist backwards, kind of.
Hmm.
And that was the creative act. So that image was in my head, and so all the images, and then I was just able to use some words and some of the things that I like the best in it. So, for instance, the fishers in Scotland, wherever that line
Hmm.
is, that on the Tweed